Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Eruvin Daf Yotes. Right on top of the Amud, says the Gemara, V'Amar B'Yirmiyah ben Elazar, Boyrei, come take a look, Shaloi K'midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Midas Basar Adam, the way, the manner in which a person relates to Hashem is so different than the way he relates to a human being. Midas Basar Adam, the method which is employed amongst humans is as follows. Mischayev Adam Harigal Malchus. If a person is slated for capital punishment, what do? Matil Leichika L'Seichpiv. They place this wooden frame into his mouth, this muzzle, Kadesh Leikal Samelach, so that he's not able to curse the king out of resentment. In contrast to the way a person relates to Hashem, Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Adam Mischayev Harigal Malchus. A person is guilty of Hariga, he's going to get killed on account of the fact that he did Avera. How does he respond? Shoisik. He remains quiet. He accepts it with perfect faith. He knows it's for his good. He knows it's meant to cleanse him of his Averas and to earn him the eternal Olam Haba. Shenarma L'cha Dumia Seila. To you, Dumia, all are quiet and accept it with faith. Not only is he quiet, he praises Hashem because he knows it's merely an expression of Hashem's love and kindness. Shenarma Tehila L'cha Dumia. Tehila, even praise. Not only that, a person relates to it kilu makrav kavar, as though he's giving a korban. As though he's paying a neder to you, Hashem. Let's take a look at Rashi who explains this. 2 lines from the top. All are quiet towards you. So it appears to the person as though he's bringing a korban. He accepts with love all the hardships, Yisurim, the tribulations. He knows it's for his benefit to cleanse him of his Averis. This quietness, that he is quiet when he experiences Yisurim, it appears to him like he's paying a vow and neder, like a korban, because he avoids resentment. He sets aside his emotions and his feelings and overcomes that, sacrifices that tendency to have resentment and gives that away to Hashem, so to speak, as a korban. Instead accepts it with love, with ava, and praises Hashem. Not only that, he knows that it's like a korban. The Yisurim are mechaper on him like a korban, which will earn him his eternal Olam Haba. So it appears to the person, the Yisurim appear like a korban to mechaper and to grant him Olam Haba. Continues the Gemara. Hainu dom Rabbi Shua ben Levi. This is compatible with Rabbi Shua ben Levi who told us. How do we explain the pasuk? Oivrei be'mekabocha mayon ishisu gam brachos yatemur. Explains as follows. Oivrei, the first word in the pasuk. Oivrei elu bnei adam she'oivrin. Our return shal Kadosh Baruch Hu. People who are oivan his ratzon do averis. Emek. That's the next word. Emek means shema mikol nehem gehenim. They make them a very deep Gehenna. Habacha, that's the next word. Sheboichen umeridin demois. They cry and shed tears out of pain. Kemayin shel shisim. So the next words in the pasuk is mayin yishisu. So they shed lots of tears, like the mayin, like the spring shel shisim. Rashi describes this as the hole underneath the mizbeach where they would pour water. So an abundance of tears are shed. Nevertheless, they acknowledge and appreciate what Hashem is doing to them. Gam brachos yate moire. They endow Hashem, the moire, the judge, with brachos. Shematzdikin aleim sadin. They justify upon themselves the judgment of Hashem, the einish. And they tell Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, Yafedanta, you've correctly judged us. Yafezi chisa, the innocent person, you correctly held him innocent. The guilty person he's correctly being held accountable. It's good that you are machayev him. You correctly established Gehenim for the Rishoim and Gan Eden Latzadikim. So even the Rishoim, when they get to that point, they acknowledge, they appreciate what Hashem is doing to cleanse them and to grant them the ultimate kindness and goodness of the eternal Gan Eden. Says the Gemara, is that the case that the Rishaim in Gan Eden do tshuva and they acknowledge and appreciate what's happening? Eini, is that so? V'amar Rishaim Malakish Rishaim. You know what happens to them? Afilu al Pischa shel Gehenim. Even when they're at the Pesach, the entrance to the Gehenim, even though they see reality right in front of them, nevertheless their desires are so overwhelming. Einam chayzim b'tshuva. They don't do tshuva. Shenamar v'yotzav aro v'pigri anashim ha'poishim bi. They'll go out and see the people there that are peshay on me, and the pasuk continues describing the fire of Gehenna which rages on and on. V'isham lo yisichve, it won't be put out. So the pasuk describes the Rishaim in present terms. Shepashu lo yinamar, doesn't say that they were peshay in the past. Ela ha'poishim. Ha'poishim denotes something in the present. Shepashim malchim la'ilam, they continuously sin. So apparently, even when they're holding at that point, they don't do tshuva. It says Malay Kasha. It depends what we're speaking about. It's not difficult. Ha b'paishi Yisrael. The first description was speaking about the sinners of Klal Yisrael. So a Yid is inherently good. Deep inside, he's toif. So as soon as the Gehenim erases the Averis, removes those layers of Avera, the goodness shines out and he appreciates. He knows what's really good for him, the closeness of Hashem, and he thanks Hashem for cleansing him. So that's describing the Paishi Yisrael. The second description here regarding the fellows who even by Gehenim, by the Pesach of Gehenim, still maintain their erroneous mode of behavior, is speaking about so this concept won't apply to them. It says the Marchanami Mestavra. It seems indeed that this is a logical approach. That this pasuk here of the Anashim HaPoishim Bi, describing the ongoing Pshia, and the pasuk there describing the raging fire which continuously burns on and on, apparently is speaking about the Poishi Oivdi Gechavim, not the Yisrael. Why? Because otherwise we have a problem. Din Kain, because otherwise Kasha. Do Rish Lakish ad Rish Lakish. We'll have a kasha from this Rish Lakish on another Rish Lakish who tells us that even the Paishi Yisrael, their experience in Gehenna is only a temporary one. They get cleansed and they move on. So apparently, it can't be that the pasuk here is describing the Paishi Yisrael who sit on and on in Gehenna and the fire keeps on burning. The Amar Rish Lakish. Paishi Yisrael ein ur Gehenim shaletas behem. The fire of Gehenim is not shailed behem, doesn't destroy them. Kavachayim Mizbeach Hazav. We learn it from the Mizbeach Hazav, the gold Mizbeach, which was in the Beis Hamikdash, which was gold plated. Ma Mizbeach Hazav. Since we find the Mizbeach Hazav, she'ein alav elo ka'ivi dinar, although it only had a thin layer of gold, a thickness of a dinar of a coin, ka'ivi dinar zav. Nevertheless, it survived all that fire, all that burning. Amad kameshanim, it stood for many years, and the fire didn't destroy it, didn't burn it out. Paishi Yisrael, certainly the Paishim amongst Klal Yisrael, shemalei and mitzvahs kerimah, that are filled with mitzvahs, like the seeds of a pomegranate. Shenemar kefelach harimah rakasech. Your temple is like a slice of a pomegranate. V'amar Shem Lakish, al tirki rakasech. Instead of reading rakasech, read as follows: Ela rei kasech, the empty ones amongst you. Shafilu rei konen shabach, even the empty ones amongst you, amongst Klal Yisrael, those that engage in inappropriate behavior, they are still filled melei and mitzvahs kirimai. So since they have all that spiritual content, certainly they're meant to be protected from the fire of Gehenna. Achas kama v'kama, certainly the fire of Gehenna cannot destroy them. So apparently, that pasuk describing the Rishonim in Gehenna who are sitting in the fire on and on and on, the fire is totally controlling them, is evidently not speaking about Paishi Yisrael, rather the Paishi of the Gechavim. Continues the Gemara, Ella, if so, how do we explain the earlier description there, that they're going to be in Gehenna, acknowledge Hashem's kindness, be matzig sadin? We just said that the fire of Gehenna is not shailit on the Rishayim. Says it's only a temporary phenomenon. Ahu the mechayve shata b'Gehenna. They were given a sentence, a temporary short-term sentence in Gehenna, but it's only temporary. Avram Avinu comes along, go masaklu, and takes them out. picks them out of Gehenna, umekabalu, and accepts them, meaning he salvages them from Gehenna. So their stay in Gehenna is merely a short temporary one. So Avraham Avinu does this to everybody, bar except Yisrael Sheba al bas ovid kechavim, a yid who had relations with a guy, the mashchar lasai, because his arla gets stretched over his milah, and V'loim Avashkele, Avraham Avinu doesn't recognize him due to his avera, which creates this spiritual effect and blocks his milah, so to speak, so Avraham Avinu does not recognize him and can't take him out. Continues the Gemara, Maskefla Rav Kahana. He disagrees. He says the pasuk there, which said V'ro bepigri anoshim hapoishim bi, which Rishon Malakish told us is in the present term, meaning they're ongoing pshia even when they're at the Pesach of Gehenna. He disagrees, Rav Kahana. He says Hasha da Amras hapoishim, that the word hapoishim means something that's ongoing, the pashi v'azli. If so, how are you going to explain the following psukim? Elama'ata d'chsiv hamoitzi v'amala. The pasuk says that Hashem is moitzi eschem eretz Mitzrayim. The other pasuk says he's mala eschem eretz Mitzrayim, referring to something in the past. Are you going to say it's ongoing? The masik, Hashem lifts us out of Mitzrayim with the mapik and continuously takes us out of Mitzrayim. The masik, the mapik, who? Ella, rather, something in the past. The asik, he picked us up out of Mitzrayim, va'apik, and took us out. Something in the past. Hachanam here as well, even though it says hapoishim, it's referring to something in the past, the pashihu, something which they did in the past. Continues the Gemara. V'amar b'yirmiyah b'Rabbi Shloisha psachim yesh leGehenna. There are three entrance ways to Gehenna. Echad b'midbar, one in the desert, v'echad b'yam, one at sea, v'echad b'Yerushalayim, and the third on Yerushalayim. Explains the Maharsha, the point here is a person should never think that he could run away from his averis and not held accountable. So these three, Midbar, Yam, Yerushalayim, correspond to three different parts of the world. The world is split into three different categories. Uninhabited, which is referenced to as Midbar, the inhabited portion, which is referenced to as Yerushalayim, built up areas, and sea. So the message here is, a person cannot run away from accountability. The Gehenna is present all over. There's a Pesach in the Midbar, the Yam, and Yerushalayim. How do we know this? But Midbar, the Chsiv, v'yerdu, heim v'chola shalahem, is referring to the Bnei Korach. They will go down Chaim Sha'olah. So Sha'ol here is referring to the depths of Gehenna, and this took place in the Midbar. B'Yam, what do we find? That the Pesach of Gehenna is also at Tzid Chsiv. By Yoina, mi beten Sha'ol shivati v'shamata koili. So he was sitting in the belly of the fish, and he said, mi beten Sha'ol, referring to Gehenna. So apparently he passed by the Pesach of Gehenna, which was at sea. V'Yerushalayim. How do we know that there was one in Yerushalayim? The Chsiv and Hashem, asher urloi b'tzion v'tanu lo b'Yerushalayim, v'tanu dver b'shmol, and dver b'shmol explained as follows: asher urloi b'tzion zu Gehenna. This is referring to the fire of Gehenna, which is in Tzion. V'tanu lo b'Yerushalayim, the fire, this oven that's burning. Zu pischa shel Gehenna. So we find that Gehenna relates to Yerushalayim as well. V'suleka, there's no other Pesach other than these three. V'amar of Marion, Amar Shimon Levi, v'amar, some say Tana Rabba bar Marion b'devei Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. So in the Beis Medrash Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, he taught this following thing: Shtei tmaros yesh begei ben hinam. There are two palm trees in this canyon, this gay called Gei ben Hinnom, which is by Yerushalayim. V'oy la'ashem b'meineihem, and there's smoke arising from between these two palm trees. V'zui shashaninu, and in reference to these palm trees, we learned the following Mishnah: Tzine harabarzak sheris, the lulav which is taken from these palm trees, are kosher to be used despite the fact that they have short leaves. So it's these two palm trees. V'zui pischa shel Gehenna, and this is the entranceway to Gehenna. So you see, there's another entranceway. Says in what Dilma, perhaps Hayin Yerushalayim. Actually, this is the one mentioned earlier, the Pesach of Yerushalayim. Continues the Gemara, Amar Shomel Levi, Zayin Shemois Yesh Gehenna. Gehenna is referenced to in 7 different ways. He has 7 different names. So I think the name of the Maharsha, that this corresponds to the Gemara in Sukkah, which tells us that the Yetzer Hara has 7 different titles, which means that he employs 7 different methods of enticing a person to lead him astray, and indeed to lead him to the terrible consequences. These 7 different types of Gehenna described here. So we have 7 names. Ve'eluhen, these are the 7 names. Sha'oil va'av vadoin. The third one is Uber Shachas. Then Uber Sha'oin v'tetayaven v'tzalmaves ve'eretz hatachtis. So these are 7 names. The Gemara is going to find the sources for all 7. Sha'oil, meaning the depths. Where do we find that in reference to Gehenna? Sha'oil shivati shamata koili. This was the pasuk mentioned earlier, referring to Gehenna. Avadoin, loss. Is your chesed going to be described when a person is a caver? Your faith in Ba'avadoin, referring to loss, referring to Gehenna. Be'er Shachas, the pit of destruction. That's another way of calling Gehenna. You will not leave my nefesh l'shoel to Gehenna l'sitein hasitcha. L'irei Shachas, you will not allow your chesed to see Shachas, this destruction, which is Gehenna. U'ba'or sha'oin v'tit hayaven. These are another 2 names. D'chsiv vayaleini v'ba'or sha'oin. Hashem took me out of this pit with raging water. V'tit hayaven. This mud. Hayaven, Rashi says, is a type of refish, type of tit of mud, which one can sink into. So we see that this is in reference to Gehenna. With Salmaves, where do we find that? D'chsiv yoshri choshech with Salmaves. Those who sit in darkness, and Salmaves here in reference to Gehenna. Ve'eretz hatachtis, the 7th and final name. Gemarahu. This is learned from Gemara tradition. We don't have a pasuk, but we know this is the 7th name of Gehenna. Says Gemara, only 7, Mesuleka? Don't we have another one, Vayika Gehenna? Says the Gemara, that's not really a name. That is referring to, that's describing the circumstance. Gay, it's a deep pit, a deep canyon, shamuka, a deep pit. Shakol yored la'al iskei chinam, that all go down, descend into Gehenna, due to nothingness. Iskei chinam, Rashi describes as aroyos, which is averos that come as a result of just fantasy and imagination. It's just chinam. So Gehenna is just describing the reason why hakoil ayored la. It's a gay, a deep area, which comes about through hinam, chinam, nothingness. So it's a punishment for nothingness. Says the Gemara, but there's another name. Va'ika tifte d'chsiv ki oreich me esmoil oruch me esmoil tafte. So it's describing Gehenna. Says the Gemara, that also is not really a name. It's telling us as follows. Ahu, that pasuk is just saying shekol mespata biyitzrei. One who allows his Yetzer Hara to convince him and lead him astray, yibal sham, he will fall there. So we described the 7 titles of Gehenna. Let's move on to Gan Eden. Gan Eden. Now we know Gan Eden is also to be found in this world, as the Rambam in Pirsha Mishnah in Sanhedrin, I believe in Perik Chelek, he says that the concept of Gan Eden is also to be found in this world. It's the most beautiful place, full of luscious fruits, most beautiful place on earth, which is hidden from view, beyond access of ordinary human beings. That's where Adam Rishon was until he did the Chet V'Tzadas and he was sent out of Gan Eden. So the Gemara is going to explore regarding the location of Gan Eden. Gan Eden, Amar Shlokish Im Eretz Yisrael. If it is to be found in Eretz Yisrael, Beis Sha'an Pischai, then the Pesach of that Gan Eden must be Beis Sha'an, as Rashi tells us, because the fruit of this location, of this city, is so much sweeter than the other fruits in Eretz Yisrael. It must be that it's because it's near the Pesach of Gan Eden. V'im be'Arvia, if the Pesach of Gan Eden is to be found in Arvia, Beis Gram Pischai, the Pesach must be in that place which has very special fruits. V'im be'in Harisu, if that's where he is, Dum Saknin Pischai, then the Pesach must be Dum Saknin on account of its high quality fruits. Be'Bavel, where were the high quality fruit found in Bavel? Abai would praise Peri, the Maver Yamina, the fruit that grew on the riverside. Maver means the side of the river, of a Pras river. Yamina on the south side. Rava Mishtabech, he would praise Peri, the Arpanya, the fruit that grew in Arpanya. And perhaps this is also due to their close proximity to the entrance of Gan Eden. Continues the Gemara. Ubeinein kimleish te revakos. This is going back to our Mishnah, which told us that oisin pasin leberois. When we construct posts around the wells which are found in Shirabim, to allow drawing water from the well which is Rosh Hashanah to the area outside the well. So by placing these 4 posts, these double posts, these L-shaped posts on all 4 corners, the area within them turns into Rosh Hashanah and allows drawing water. Let's perhaps take a quick look at the Mishnah again, a part of the Mishnah, which will introduce us to the upcoming Gemara. Mishnah back on Yedzayim and Beis, 5 lines from the bottom, beginning with the line Ubeineim. So how much space in between these posts? Ubeineim k'mleish te revakos shalosh bakar. You allow enough space for 2 revakos. Revaka is a group of animals. So you allow room for 2 of these groups, with each group containing 3 bakar, 3 cows. Divrei Meir, this total is actually 10 amos, which is a sheer Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda, you can allow for a larger space. Shel arba. Each one of these 2 groups has 4 animals, which totals a share of 13 amma and a shlish. So 13 and a third amos. And the Mishnah proceeds. Kshurais v'lo mitaros. The revaka, this group of animals, is actually tied together. It's shurais. The animals must be tied together. V'lo mitaros, not let loose. So when they're tied, they actually occupy less space. Achas nechneses v'achas yotzis. One group is on its way in, one on the way out, meaning you have to allow for 2-way traffic, which needs a little bit more space to accommodate the traffic. And the Mishnah continues, mutalakav lebe'er. You can place them very close, the posts very close to the be'er, but must leave some space. Provided there's enough space for the para's head and most of his body to enter and drink. This will eliminate the concern of the owner being tempted to take his pail outside of the contained area to feed his animal. So that's the Mishnah. Continues the Gemara. 3 lines from the bottom. So in between these posts, you leave room for these 2 groups of animals, which are tied. Each group is tied. Kshuris v'loy mutaris, not untied. Now this seems to be redundant. Pshita, of course. Given the tongue like kshuris havu. Once the Mishnah already says they're tied, ananyadinan d'loy havu mutaris. Certainly we know they're not untied. So why the redundancy? Says one Ma'u the Tema, perhaps I would think. Kshurais, when we say kshurais, we don't mean actually tied. Ke'en kshurais. They're walking very close to each other. It's like they're tied. Aval mamash loy, they're not actually tied together. Kamash malon v'loy mutaris. That's why the Mishnah repeats itself. Kshurais v'loy mutaris, not untied. We mean literally tied together, in which case they take up less space. Achas nechneses v'achas yotzes. Tana, we learned in the Brisa. Revaka nechneses, revaka yotzes. A group going in, a group going out. Meaning, it's not the individual animals which are going in and out, in which case they would need much more space. But it's the groups that we're speaking about. One group going in and one group going out. Tana Rabbanan kama roisha v'ruba shel para. So you need to leave that space, the amount of the roish and the roiv of the para, between the post and the bear. So how much is that in the area? Shtei amos. You need to leave a space of 2 amos on either side of the be'er, between the be'er and the post. Now we spoke about the area between the posts, accommodating the groups of the animals. Now, how wide are those animals? Bekama avishal para. What is the thickness of each para? Amma, ushnei shlishi amma. 1 amma plus 2/3. Shehein ke'eser. Divrei Meir. So according to Meir, there's 6 animals. Multiply that by 1.2/3, you come out with a total of approximately 10 amos. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's 8 animals in total, times 1.2/3. So you come up with a total of approximately 13-14. Let's take a look at Rashi. Top line in Rashi, Shein ke'eser amos, shisha bakar. According to Rabbi, it's 6 bakar, times 1.2/3, which equal approximately 10. Come on, Parach. Soon the Gemara is going to ask, Mike Esa, what do you mean approximately 10? Ha'eser mechavana saying it's exactly 10. Rabbi Yehuda says it's 13-14. Shmoina bakar, 8 bakar, yotzu mechal shleish esrei. It's beyond 13 amos. Uchlal yudad leibo hadn't yet reached 14 amos. Why? Yud Gimel Amma Ushlishein. They total 13 and a third Amis. Says the Gemara on the second line, Ke'eser. So according to Rameh, it's approximately 10. Har Esahavin, it's exactly 10. So why use an approximate term? Says, well, you're right. But the term employed here was on account of the fact that the Brisa wanted to apply that term in the next portion of the Brisa. Meshum de boy the misna seifa. Since the Brisa wanted to proceed and say regarding Rabbi Yehuda, Kishleish Esrei, therefore the Reisha also employed that approximate term. Says Mar, but why Kishleish Esrei by Rabbi Yehuda? Kishleish Esrei Tfrei Havin. It's actually more than 13. Generally, when you say approximately, it implies that it's perhaps not that much, a bit less. It's approximately that much. But here it's actually more than 13. So why say Kish Leish Esrei? Says, well, you're right. Mishum de boy misna karba esrei. Because the Brisa wanted to say approximately 14. So on account of that, it also said approximately 13. Says, well, but how is that correct? Karba esrei holei havyan. It's not anywhere near 14. So if it would be close to 14, fine. We don't understand why it said approximately 14, but here it's 13 and a third, which is nowhere near 14. It's nowhere near. So how come you're using a term ka'abasri? Amra Papa, what the Brisa means is as follows. It's so in between 13 and 14. It's 13 and a third. It's greater than 13. But does not reach 14. So somewhere in between. And that is why the Brisa calls it Kishleish Esrei Ukar Ba'asrei. It's somewhere between 13 and 14. On account of that, when it comes to Reb Meir, the Brisa also said Ki Esem. Continues the Gemara, Amar Papa. So we spoke about the size of the gap, according to Reb Meir, being 10 amas or less. According to Reb Yehuda, 13 and a third amas or less. Now, what if the gap is greater? Then you must go ahead and lessen the gap, diminish it by adding more posts. So the corner posts, the double-sided posts, the L posts are called diyumdin. But if we have too great a gap between those diyumdin, you must add pshutin, which are flat posts, which are placed along the perimeters of this contained area to go ahead and lessen the gap between those corner posts. Says Rav Papa, B'boyer shmoina, when the boyer is 8 amas wide, all agree, there's no need for additional boards. Why? Because we have the boyer being 8, plus you need to have an area of 2 amas on either side, as we mentioned earlier, to allow for the cow to come in. So the entire area is 8 plus 2 plus 2, which is 12. Now the corner posts are an amma wide. So the gap between those posts are only 10 amas. We started with 12. We took off an amma on each side because the posts enclosed that amma on each side, leaving us with a gap of only 10 amas between the posts. All agreed there's no need to add pshut in here. That's a sheer pesach, even Rameh would agree. On the other hand, if we have a large area, too large, if the bird itself is 12, add another 2 from each side, which is a total of 16. Now when you place those corner posts, the gap in between them will be too great. It will be 14 amas. All agree to be in pshutin. You must add flat posts. Ki pligi, when then is there a machlekes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda? When it's somewhere in between these numbers. So it's greater than 10 amas. Reb Meir being in pshutin, since the gap is beyond 10 amas, we need to add additional posts along the perimeters to lessen the gap between the corner posts. Rabbi Yehuda being in pshutin, we don't need pshutin because it's within 13 and a third amas. Says Rabbi Papa, Michael Mashman, what is he coming to teach us? The distance, the allowed distance between the posts, according to Rabbi it's 10, according to Rabbi 13 and a third. Tanina, we already learned that in the Brisa. The Brisa clearly told us these shiurim. Says Rabbi Papa, Brisa he never really heard the Brisa, and he came up with this number on his own, Michael Mashman Brisa, and indeed he's teaching us the same halacha as the Brisa. So he came to this conclusion on his own that the required space on each side of the bar is 2 amas, as we learned earlier, that the total width of all the paras, according to Reb Meir, is 10, according to Reb Yehuda is 13 and a third, because each para is 1 2/3 amma. So this conclusion he came to on his own, which indeed is compatible with the Bryce. Continues the Gemara. Boy mine Abaya mi Rabba. So Abaya asked Rabba the following question. According to our mayor, if this gap is greater than 10 amos, he must add pshutim. Herich b'diyumdin kishir pshutim. What if instead of putting those flat posts, he actually extended the corner posts and lessened the gap between the two posts to the required amount? So herich b'diyumdin, he extended the yumdin kishir pshutim according to the shear which would be required to place pshutim, meaning to avoid placing those pshutim, he extended the diyumdin. Is that okay? The Rameh amount. What is the halacha according to Rameh? Meaning, perhaps he specifically requires one to place pshutim so that they provide heker. They're indicative of the fact that he is diminishing the gap, something which is visible. Perhaps merely extending those diyumdin do not accomplish the same accomplishment. Amar lei. So Rabbi responded, Tanisor, we learned it in the Mishnah that it's okay. The Mishnah told us that if he creates a large contained area, meaning the posts were situated at a distance, at a great distance from the bear, that's okay. Provided that he adds more boards. My lab does that not mean the marach bidiyumdin? We said shiyarba b'pasan. That implies that he's actually increasing the size of the pasan. He's extending those corner posts, and that's okay. That's not what it means. The mafish vavid pshutim means that he increases, he makes more pshutim, more flat boards to place along the perimeters. If that's the case, instead of saying which implies that he's extending the pas itself, he's enlarging those corner posts. It should have said they must increase the number of the boards by placing flat boards in between. Tani, so read Ashiyabra Pasin, indeed, that's the way we're meant to read the Mishnah. He's meant to increase the flat boards. Ikadami, there's another version of his response. Amalei, he told him we learned. Tani saw we learned in the Mishnah. Uvavad Ashiyabra Bipasin, he must increase with these boards. My love, the mafish of it pshutin doesn't mean that he's going to add the number of boards. He's going to increase and go ahead and construct pshutim. No, that's not what it means. The marach b'diyumdin. It simply means he's going to extend those corner posts. Indeed, it seems like this is the appropriate approach. Since the Mishnah says which indicates he's going to enlarge and extend those same corner posts, and that's sufficient without adding flat posts in between. No, indeed, it seems that this is the correct approach. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we have the maximum of 13 amma and a shlish between the boards. What if the area is larger than that? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, is it better to place flat boards or to extend the corner boards? What if we have a great area, according to Rabbi Yehuda, which requires adding something to lessen the gap? Pshutin of it. Can he place flat boards? Or perhaps we prefer that he extends those corner posts. Why? Because a flat board which is placed right in the middle there, with a huge gap on either side, 13 amos and a third on either side, that empty space is going to be mevatel that board. So perhaps it's better to enlarge and extend the corner boards, the corner posts, which are more on solid footing. They're double cornered posts. They're not considered to be surrounded on both sides with empty space. So perhaps that's preferred. So he told him, we actually learned this in a brayso. How close to the be'er can you put those posts? You must leave room to allow the head and most of the body of the parrot to enter and to drink within, as the one mentioned earlier. So there's a share of 2 amos. You must leave 2 amos of space between the post and the well. How far away from the bear can you plant those posts? Doesn't matter. Kurayim. Even if the area contained within is so great and large, a place where you can plant a kur 30 sa of seeds, kurayim, or 2 kur, that's okay. Because we regard this area as a properly contained area, as a din of a residential enclosure, and therefore there's no limit as per the size. Rabbi Yehuda, there is a limit. Beis sosai mutter. If the area contained within it is up until 2 sa'ah, which is 100 amos by 50, then you can carry within it. Yoisim beis sosai aser. But if it's larger than 2 sa'ah, it's aser, because according to him, this area within the pasim is not considered to be a properly enclosed area. It doesn't have a residential status to it, due to the inferior mechitzes which are surrounding this area. And therefore, we apply the general formula that an area which isn't properly enclosed is only mutter to be carried within it if it is up to the shear of 2 sa'ah. So Chacham responded, why is this different than ordinary construction? Do you not agree when a deer and a sar, these are animal pens, corrals, muktzeh, a backyard, a front yard, that even if it's large in size, afilu bas chameshes kurim, even if it's 5 kur in size, a place where you can plant 5 kur, afilu bas asora kurim, even 10 kur, shemuter, there's no concern there, because they're properly enclosed areas. So this as well, when it comes to the area between the pasim, why are you limiting it to 2 sa'ah? Amar lehands, he told them there's a big difference. Zu mechitza, these examples that you've listed to me are surrounded with properly constructed mechitzes. Therefore, there's no limit as per the area within the mechitzes. They're considered to be residential areas. Ve'elu pasin, but these are merely pasin, merely boards, which are surrounding this bear. So since they're improperly constructed, we give a limit of 2 sa'ah. It doesn't have that residential quality to it. Now, it appears that Rabbi Yehuda is referring to those middle posts, those flat boards, not the corner posts, which are really considered to be proper mechitzes. So when he's referencing pasim and negating them as not properly constructed, apparently what is he referring to? The posts that must be placed in between those corner posts to lessen the gap between them. So since they're merely flat posts, middle of nowhere, they're not considered to be properly constructed mechitzes, and therefore the area within it is not a properly enclosed area. It doesn't have that residential quality to it, and therefore we're limited at 2 sa'ah. V'im isa. Now getting back to our question, if you maintain that the proper approach according to Rabbi Yehuda is to actually extend the corner posts rather than placing flat boards between those corner posts to lessen the gap, you meant to extend the actual corner posts themselves. In both cases, we're speaking about a mechitza, meaning a chutzner is surrounded by a properly constructed mechitza, and therefore you can enclose even a large area. Here as well, by the pasan, if it's merely extending those corner posts, which are considered to be mechitzas, they're double corner posts, they create a mechitza. We're merely extending them. So here as well by pasan, we have properly constructed mechitzas. Why are we limited to 2 sa'ah? Why the difference between the two? So apparently, Rabbi Yehuda allows placing flat boards between those corner posts. That's what he's referring to. Says more, not necessarily so. Hachikama. This is what he meant to say. Zu teres mechitza aleh. An ordinary chatzar, for instance, which is surrounded by a properly constructed mechitza, it has a teres mechitza, is classified as a proper mechitza. As we see that the maximum hole that's allowed in a chatzar wall is up until 10 ames, which is considered a pesach. But past that, considered to be a breach. So this is an ordinary chatzar. However, when it comes to pasan, how wide is the gap between these boards? It's much greater than 13 1/3. Ve'elu teres pasan leim. They're classified as merely pasan. As you see, we allow much greater gap between those boards, 13 1/3 amma. So being that these are classified differently than an ordinarily constructed enclosure, you see you allow a much greater gap between the boards. So apparently, this is not considered to be a proper mechitza. This area contained within is not a properly enclosed area. And therefore, we give it a limit of 2 sa'ah. So we leave it inconclusive whether or not, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can place pasim between those boards, or you're meant to actually extend the corner boards. Another shiloh. tail maslakit. What if we have a mound, a tail, or shisarab, which is a steep mound, hamislakit asara, which rises 10 tfachim, mitoich arba, from within an area of 4 amas. Meaning, if you're walking up this hill, when you've walked 4 amas, you've already been lifted 10 amas off the ground. So it's a very steep hill. As Rashi brings, we learn in Gemara Shabbos, this has a din of a machitza. So beyond it, it's considered shisayachid. The question here is, can we apply this mound to be used as diyumdin, as those corner posts around the bear? Nidain mishum diyumid, is it treated as a diyumid, or einay nidain mishum diyumid? Or perhaps you cannot use it as a diyumid. So it's not really an L-shaped mound. You must view it as though it's square and carved out as an L. Right now it's merely just a round mound. Can it be used or not? Amalei, so Rabbi responded, Tanisua. We learned about this in the following brayso. So this is again speaking near the Be'er. If there was a square stone, so instead of being an L-shaped post, it's square. Can that be used? So he says it can be used. Royin, we view it, kol shi'ilu tichalik. If you go ahead and carve out the middle of that stone to create an L-shaped corner post, v'yesh ba'amalakan, v'amalakan, you have enough material there that if you carve out the middle, you end up with an am in each direction, L-shaped post. That's okay. Nidam mishum diyumid. It can be applied as a diyumid. V'im lav, but if this doesn't work, eina nita mishum diyumid, it cannot be used. Says Rabbi Shimon Lazar, Rabbi Shmo b'noi shab yechem breika omer. He adds another halach. Ha'isa sham even akula. What if the stone that was there was actually round and not square? That can be used as well. Right? We take a look and we view it. We imagine. Kol shi'ilu tichakik v'tichalik. If you can take this round stone, and if you would theoretically straighten out the perimeter, you would turn it into a square. Tichakik means turning it into a square. V'tichalik, and then carve out the middle to turn it into an L. V'yesh ba'amalakan, amalakan, there's enough material there to result in an am in each direction. Nidam mishum diyumid, this can be used for a diyumid. V'im lav, but if this doesn't work, eina nidam mishum diyumid, there's not enough material there which will result in a L-shaped post, an am in each direction, it cannot be used. Says more Micah Miflaki, what is the point of contention between these two Tanoim? They both seem to be saying the same thing. Mar Savar Chadroin Amrina, the first Shita, who discussed a square stone, and he said, well, if you can go ahead and carve it out to turn into an L, that's okay. So he holds we can employ one stage of Roin. Carve it out, it's good, fine, then you can use it. Trade Roin Lamrin. But if we need to apply a double Roin, like in the case of the round stone, so first you need to square out the outside and then carve out the inside. That's applying the concept of Roin twice, 2 phases of Roin. That we don't say, Lo Yamrin. So that's the Shita of Rav Shimon Lazar, who specifically discussed a square stone, which only requires one stage of Roin, the carving out of the inside. Umar Sarah, the second Shita held, Afilu Roin Nami Amrinan. So he holds, he is Savar, he holds Afilu Trei Roin, even if you apply twice Roin, meaning you square out the outside and carve out the inside. We need to visualize 2 phases, 2 steps being done. Nami Amrinan, that too can be applied. So Rabbi, what he was responding was as follows. You asked me regarding the tail, this mound, this round mound, there's just round. Can that be applied as a diyumid? It depends on these 2 shitas. Whether or not we can apply roin twice. Because this round mound requires twice roin. Number 1, you need to square it. Number 2, to carve out the inside. Another question. If we have this L-shaped post, which is consisting of kanim, reeds, bamboos, which are inserted in the ground. Kana, pachas mishleish. So they're placed at a distance of less than 3 tfachim between each kana, which is lavud. Nida mishum diyumid, can that be applied as a diyumid, or lav, or not? Now, what would the reason not to use this? Because these kanim merely have one element a vertical element to them. They're upright. They're placed within 3 tefachim, so they have lavud. But can you apply such a incomplete mechitza, which only has the element, the vertical element, to be used as a jumud around a bear, which in itself is so deficient because of the large exposure there? The gap between those posts is so great. The area within it is paretz meruba, it's mostly exposed. So in it itself is already an insufficiently contained area. Can you go and add another deficiency by using this incomplete jumud, which only contains a vertical element, or not? Nida mishum jumud, or not? Amar lei seitom taniso. We learned about this in the Bryce. Hayisham ilonai gader. So near the be'er there was a tree or a gader fence, a chitza sakonim, or this partition of reeds. Nida mishum jumud. It can be used as a jumud. My love, are we not speaking about this case? Kana pachas mishleisha. When the kanan were placed within 3 tefachim of each other, so we see that it can be used. Why? So he said, no, not necessarily. Perhaps chitzas hakanim is referring to an entirely different type of kanim arrangement. Gudrisa de kanim. We're speaking about a cluster of kanim. So it's a plant coming out of the ground, and on bottom it's solid. So although on top it spreads out in all directions, but since this kanim plant, this plant of reeds, on bottom is solid, so it's a solid mechitza, and that can be used as a jumud, as opposed to the kane, which is placed next to each other, which only has a vertical element. Ihachi. So he responded, if that's what the Bryce is referring to, this cluster, this naturally growing cluster of kanim, hainu ilan. This is another example of a tree. And the Bryce already mentioned ilan, so apparently it's not referring to this type of arrangement. So he responded, Ve'elamai, you're going to say kana pachas mishleisha? The Brisa is referring to the reeds placed next to each other. That's what chitzas hakana means, and that can be used. Haine gader. If so, this is merely another example of a fence, and the Brisa already mentions fence. So why the repetition? Elamai is lachamema. So it must be you're going to say trei gavni gader. It's not a problem. The Brisa is merely mentioning 2 different types of gader. One is a solid fence, and one is an incomplete fence, using kanim which only have vertical element to it. And that's the chiddush of the Bryce. So according to me as well, that I maintain that we're speaking about the cluster of kanim coming out of the ground. The question was, why does the Bryce need to mention it once it already spoke about an Elon? Trei gavni Elon. Bryce wants to speak about 2 different types of trees. And the chiddush is that even this cluster of kanim, which fizzle out on top, don't really have enough material to visualize a carving out, this is still okay because we focus on the bottom where it has solid material. Ikad Amri, there's another version of this discussion. Gudrisa de kanikam boili. Abaye asked of Rava regarding this cluster of kanim going out of the ground. Gudrisa de kanimai, what is the halacha? Can it be used for a jumud or not? Amalei respond to saw. It seems to be contained in the following Bryce. Hayasham gader ilan. If there was a fence or a tree, or chitzas hakanim, or this partition of reeds, nida mishum jumud. It can be used as a jumud. My love, are we not speaking about gudrisa de kani? Your very quick case, this cluster of kanim going out of the ground, which can be used as a jumud. Says Marloi, not necessarily. Perhaps when the Bryce says chitzas hakanim, it's referring to the other example, kana pachas mishleisha. When you have a properly shaped post, an L-shaped post, which consists of kanim placed within 3 tefachim of each other. So since this post is properly shaped, it's superior to this mere cluster of kanim coming out of the ground. And perhaps that's what the Bryce allows to be used for a jumud, but not the cluster of kanim. Ihachi. So he responded, if that's the case, if that's what the Bryce is referring to, haine gader. This is merely just another example of a fence. And the Bryce already mentioned a fence, so why the repetition? Apparently, the Bryce is referring to a cluster of kanim. So he responded, Ve'elamai gudrisa de kani. So what are you going to say? That we're speaking about the cluster of kanim? Hainu ilan. The Bryce already mentioned the tree. Why the repetition? Elamai is lachamema. So evidently you're going to say, Trei gavni ilan. Why would the Bryce mention 2 types of trees? Because they're 2 different types. This is not your standard tree, although it's solid on bottom, but it fizzles out on top. It doesn't have the ability to be carved out like your ordinary tree. The Brisa is coming to teach us even this is okay. So there's a chiddush here. There's a regular Ilan and this type of Ilan. Hachanami. Here as well, meaning according to my opinion, that when the Brisa speaks about chitza sakonim that can be used for a diyumit, it's referring to the kana that was placed alongside the next kana. The Brisa is telling us that's suitable for a diyumit. The question was that apparently that's not what the Brisa is speaking about, because the Brisa already spoke about a gadar offense. Why would the Brisa repeat itself? You know what the answer is? Trei gavni gadar. These are two different varieties of a fence. So the Brisa first speaks about the properly constructed fence, which is suitable for diyumit, then proceeds to describe an improperly constructed fence, the chitza sakonim, in which case the kana placed next to the other kana, this only contains a vertical element to it. The Brisa is telling us that even this can be applied for a diyumit. Okay, time for a brief review of today's daf. The Gemara began by discussing one who is mekabel yisurim ba'ava. He accepts with love the hardships that Hashem offers him, and he views it as though he's giving a carbon, makriv a carbon to Hashem, sacrificing, cleansing himself of his averis to earn the eternal reward. The Gemara tells us that the fire of Gehenna is not shaylit, it doesn't completely destroy even the Paishi Yisrael, who are protected with a spiritual protection due to the fact that they're filled with mitzvahs karimai. The Gemara gives us 7 names for Gehenna, and we also discuss Gan Eden. We have several questions that Abaye asked of Rabbah. We know that according to Rameir, the maximum space allowance between the 2 corner posts is 10 amas. What if the gap is larger than that? He must go ahead and lessen the size of that gap. The question is, do we insist that he places flat boards along the perimeters of the enclosure to lessen the gap between the corner boards? Or is it enough that he's marach b'diyumdin, that he extends the corner posts to lessen the gap in that manner? We had a similar question according to Rabbi Yehuda, who tells us that we have a maximum allowance of 13 amas and a third between those corner posts. What if the area is greater than that? Can he go ahead and place flat boards to lessen the gap? Or do we insist that he extend those corner posts to lessen the gap? The Gemara proceeded to tell us that even a stone, which is a non-L-shaped item, can be used as a diyumit. We employ the concept of a royin. We visualize, we imagine as though this stone has been carved out and been formed into an L-shaped post. All agree, chad royin amrin, one application of royin we apply. What about trei royin? We have something which needs twice royin. For instance, a round stone. So number 1, we need to square the outside. Number 2, to carve out the inside. But machlek is whether or not we apply trei royin. The same concept will apply to a telem slacket, this large mound in Shesram, which is round. So you need to number 1 square it and then carve it out. Machlekes will be whether or not we apply trei royin in this case. The Gemara concludes with a question regarding the following 2 examples. If one constructed an L-shaped diyumit by using kanim, reeds placed upright next to each other within 3 tfachim, does that work? So there's a positive element here because they're constructed in L-shaped form. There's a negative element because it only contains a vertical dimension to it. What about Gudrisa de Kani, this cluster of reeds growing out of the ground? This has a positive element to it because it's solid on the bottom, it has both vertical and horizontal elements to it, and can be carved out into a properly shaped diyumit. The disadvantage here is, because as you go up this plant, the kanim go in all different directions, which does not provide us with enough material to be carved out into a diyumit. So do you focus on the bottom or on the top? And the Gemara seems to leave both questions unresolved.